Hiya. This video is about manipulation. Now, when I think about manipulation in this power and control way, in everyday life, it seems like it's just other people around. You know what I mean? It doesn't seem, it seems like it's just them, what they're thinking, but it's not. When you look at it carefully, the thing that people are cooperative with one another. They're not trying to be power tripping over other people. Not, I mean, they might in relationships and so forth. Teenagers especially have a classic example of relationship issues. But it's often and usually when cooperation breaks down between people who meet in the streets and stuff, it's from issues at the top that have been given to them like poison. So like for instance, people talk about stuff that when it's the pattern I noticed. It's a pattern. So money issues, or so that's class war or culture war issues. These are from the top, and these are the things that can get people, pretending maybe that they're like such and such because they're like local in the street or something, but really they don't really like them, or they would actually sometimes just blurt it out. But this is like the poison from the top. It's not ever come from people at the bottom. So obviously, if people at the bottom are suffering, they can be easily manipulated. Poison can be inserted in there, give them a scapegoat, and that's an obvious divide and rule thing. But there's always the money and power thing anyway, even without that. So the class war thing would exist without, even if we got rid of the right wing, because the liberal left are just the same. They're just the same. They support massive economic and power inequality. Just the same. If you say, "Oh, we're just an inch different," well, big deal. So we still have the same thing then. You know what I mean? It's no different. So that's the main thing as well. The main thing when I talk about propagandists isn't the right wing stuff on that horrible divide and rule. It's much more horrible. It's the very thing that brings that sort of thing a chance, to be exploited. It's the original huge power, wealth and income and voice inequality, the stuff that the liberal left and the right support together as one. Their similarities are far more important than their differences, because their similarities on the big meaty stuff: capitalism, power, giant news media corporations, US empire, all that stuff. They're one on the stuff that counts, that is really important, that affects people's lives, that makes some people successful and other people commit suicide. It's putting it bluntly, but that's the truth. So when I say we must never become like them equals the 0.0000001% clique, I think I mean it, because why would I want to be like people that I think are propagandists possessing people's minds for the benefit of themselves while poisoning society to maintain the same old massive inequalities as any time in history. I mean, I'm not being emotional when I say that they deserve words like slimy, rat, scum. I don't think that they should be killed or anything. Don't worry about that. I just think that doesn't mean to say they're not slimy, rat, scum. You know what I mean? I don't think that human beings being killed is ever a good idea. They have human rights, even if they are slimy, rat, scum. I mean, how could I not think that when you think about what I'm saying, that they possess people's minds for their own benefit and to make other people live lives that are shit? How could I not think that bad of them in that sense? Not of any particular individual, more like the collective thing that they preside over. They're presiding over some of the worst inequality in human history. It's disgraceful. It's not like okay. It's not like, oh, well, it doesn't matter much. It's a crime. And possessing people's minds, turning people against each other for their benefit, And some of the people who support them are the most victims of all because they've had their mind took over successfully. So I just don't see anything good about it. I just think that it's terrible. It's terrible. It's terrible. It's just a serious abuse of millions of people. It's disgusting on a grand scale. Now, traditionally, I want to say that I don't think quite like this, but at first I want to say what traditionally this is described as. They are thought of as the moneyed capitalist class, maintained in their hegemonic position by the political class. And that moneyed capitalist class and the political class are one. Meanwhile, the educated are split between system liberal left and ourselves, the outside system left, who are outside the system. But I cannot stand this talk. I can't stand it because these terms, these labels, these are ingredients and examples of what maintains these divisions in society. That these are the very things that they can use, these terms, to divide people up for their own power and control. So I think that by using these terms, we're meant to be educated, right? Well, we're giving them ammunition to just shoot us. And I think that that's what, if I was them, I'd be happy with all this. I'd be happy with all this because this is exactly what we're wanting. These are terms that this is how it's meant to go. So we mustn't use these terms. Not eventually. I mean, you can't help but contradict yourself a bit, but we can still see it enough to not contradict ourselves too much to play it in their hands. There's a difference. Something can become habitual, but when you realize it, you become conscious of it, you make the mistake less often. And when you do use the terms, you're careful about, I'm saying this because, but I understand that this isn't what it's going to be and isn't what it's really like. This is just artificial. These terms are just artificial. They're just out there so that the top bottom can be used and abused for the top's benefit against the rest of us. See, that's all there is, a top and a bottom. A top and a bottom in terms of power, wealth, income, all that inequality. And in terms of top, bottom, in terms of voice, how much power you've got. Some people can reach millions because they're part of mega billionaire news media corporations. Murdoch is the obvious name that comes to mind. While the rest of us get Twitter, right? And maybe reach 20 people. Some people can't reach that many. And then they call that equality. It's like calling the Titanic and a paper canoe, like made from paper, of equal size, something like that. Or one of the great cruise ships these days to get up to date. Right. We need to smash this top bottom to bits. By doing that, we've smashed the propaganda that surrounds it. No longer would it exist. So by smashing the reality a bit, the propaganda goes down with it. Rather than taking on the propaganda, which you can't do because you just fall in their trap all the time. They've got the propaganda science. The science of propaganda has been perfected by them. They can't be took on that in the same way that the military cannot be took on by the people, because they'd win. They win the propaganda and they win the military because this is the stuff they've perfected. They've perfected the propaganda, all the talk, and they've perfected the military by getting armed to the hilt with tanks and guns. So all we can do is take down the reality. The reality has to come down. Forget their propaganda. There's a reality of top bottom. Change that. You get rid of the poisonous propaganda that divides us. And some people do see through the propaganda that props up the top bottom system, props it up. But it's easier to do when it doesn't either enrich yourself or you think it has no chance of enriching yourself. And you see that it doesn't enrich anyone around you. This is why working class see through it more often than the middle class, and that the middle class see through it more than those in the state superstructure. That's the easiest way. In other words, reality is the easiest way, rather than working out that weird propaganda matrix that they have. So I think the system will collapse when the middle class collapses in economic, material, real terms, real world. Because if the middle class collapses, that is a top, bottom, real thing. That is not their game of the propaganda that surrounds it. In fact, their game gets smashed. It's seen through when the middle class collapses. So in the 20th century, I think a state superstructure really wanted to buy the middle class off a lot with propaganda. The propaganda's updated now with them because the middle class have become more liberal left, but it's the same. It's the same. It's propping up the state superstructure, all the meaty stuff, capitalism, the gross inequality, all the usual stuff, the power and control. It's all still the same thing. The similarities in concerning the partisan artificial fake divide are more important by a million miles than the differences. So what kinds of people do the real world have to convince then, if we're looking at the middle class, to come tumbling down? Well, the middle class tends to have the same sort of people in it as the educated class. So there's the two demographics: the middle class, educated class. Now, it's not entirely the same demographic. There's a slight caveat that students, for example, are educated, but they haven't got to being the middle class professionals yet. So you can split them a bit, but you'll find that if you're uniting them pretty much the same demographic, similar, nearly the same, but not exactly the same. But they're like it's the middle class, and the students, if they collapse the system left. I know I'm not meant to use them terms. Here we go saying, but sometimes we've got to use them and play into the trap. But if they unite with the working class, who have always been suspicious of all the power control stuff, always will be, then that's game over. At least they'd have to get the military out at that stage. Now, so the system liberal left, for sure, they're anti-sexism, anti-prejudice towards lesbians and gays, more internationalist, stuff like that. They're aware that those minorities or whatever are doing nothing wrong. But, and this is more important, not only do many liberal Tories agree with that, but similarities between the artificial fake partisan divide, as said, are infinitely more important than the differences, because the similarities are all about the gross inequality of power, of control. It's about sustaining this horrible status quo in society of power and inequality. So So unfortunately, the liberal left system types are guilty of maintaining the vast state superstructure and all of its ingredients, here, abroad, and forever. That means the vast inequality in wealth and income, the vast inequality in voice, of megaphones for some, of Twitter for many. The US military-industrial complex, all its wars, the UK's support for all of that is also sacrosanct to this liberal metropolitan system left, united with the centre-right. And capping all of this off is the propaganda that they preside over and enable that makes it all look like this, like as if this eternal state superstructure, this eternal government is not a thing, when it is the only thing. The fake political world are just their puppets pushed onto the stage to be the real, eternal state superstructure's spokespeople. This sounds bad, but it gets worse. The puppets cause conflict in society, possess people's minds, harm relationships, even though they're all actors on a stage. Meanwhile, client journalism dominates at the national level. At national level, it's a monopoly. Many people wonder why local newspapers are so much more mature than the national on politics. The answer is because the local are not client journalists for the propaganda matrix. The local news media are innocent on that, not involved in this extreme historical cartel of a crime that is guilty of taking over otherwise cooperative people's minds. I discussed this at length in my 3-part Science of Propaganda videos. This propaganda matrix doesn't quite infect everyone. It's more mind possession for those who are a minority within the partisan, artificial, fake divide. It affects those, and it kind of tricks those that are outside of that to, although they're not caught in that poisonous web, they still believe that thing over there that they don't want to get involved in because they're suspicious of it is somehow still real. But it's the partisan divide ones, artificial, fake partisan divide ones, who are caught most by it and who suffer by it. Those that are outside it, I think, are a bit suspicious of it. Rightly so. They should be very suspicious of it. It's a complicated thing, that the difference between those who are caught by it fully and those who are outside it. I mean, it's not important so much that I find out my exact view on that, but there is a difference, because those who are caught in the web of thinking it's totally real and they treat it importantly and they join in, well, their minds are possessed forever. Those that are outside it at least have that suspicion of it, that there's something not right there. You know, they might never articulate it to themselves brilliantly, but at least they've got that suspicion. And I think that suspicion is definitely growing as we live through this transformative period of human history. For those that it affects and impacts and takes over their minds, well, they are played like herded sheep, or they are played like they are chess pieces on a board for the propaganda matrix to move around however they wish. Or you can just think of them as those within the matrix, as in like the movie, except that rather than it being a virtual reality techie world, it's a propaganda narrative world. They're just analogies, of course. So state superstructure top bottom is what this is really about. If we get beyond the matrix, it's about, the reality is there's a top and there's a bottom. and very few indeed are at the top. That's why they need propaganda, because if there's just a very few of them, they couldn't get away with it if they're just dealing with hard reality. So in conclusion, this state superstructure becomes threatened when and only when they lose the majority of middle class. If the state superstructure fail to buy them off, then they're truly buggered. On the one hand, we naturally feel that they should at least buy people off so those people can pay the bills and survive. On the other hand, when you think about the crime of possessing millions of people's minds with propaganda, then we really need this collective criminal abuse to end forever. In other words, the eternal state superstructure collapse is rather like the 1,000-year Reich collapsed. Bring down this vile propaganda racket once and for all. Let us confine it to the history books, focusing on its disgusting mind-possessing propaganda that is no different from all of its enemies, Russia, China, Middle Ages propaganda. State superstructure applies intelligence towards vastly unequal and mind-possessing ends. Its intelligence has one goal: maintaining its own power and control at all costs. Okay, that's the video for today. So hope we make some progress one day.